Mamdani's just like, I'm a victim too.
Oh, totally.
Look what happened to my family, right? I mean, he doesn't even,
But-
you're going
but-
to the actual reality, the truth of this. He doesn't even, it doesn't matter to him. He just wanted to
But this-
complain. Zohran is trying to tell everyone, remember how he said that his aunt couldn't ride the subway after 9/11 because of Islamophobia? Turns out that's not true. And also, she never even wore a hijab. Play cut 1. Here's how he explains it.
I was at the press conference yesterday. They said, can you tell us who your aunt is, who you were referring to? I said, yes, this is my aunt. This is my Zerafui. This is my father's cousin, and this was her story.
So how can you convince New Yorkers if that is the type of person that you are, in other words, that you don't tell the truth?
Well, it's not a lie. My father's cousin is my aunt. That's how I referred to her growing up my whole life, Zerafui. And I think to have the takeaway from the New York Post and so many others after I gave a speech outside of a mosque for 10 minutes about the Islamophobia we've seen in this race and in our politics, to be the question of whether or not Zerafui was my aunt.
Clay, he didn't lie. He just said something that was untrue, got caught, and now wants to move on.
And conveniently is now pointing to someone who's dead that cannot be tracked down to talk about anything here. And this is the Norm Macdonald joke brought to fruition. For those of you who remember, Norm Macdonald, Saturday Night Live comedian, among many other jobs that he had, when Saturday Night Live was actually a show worth watching, who memorably said when nuclear war happened and basically the population was wiped out, can you imagine the Islamophobia that might arise? And, you know, if you remember back in 9/11, as you well do, Buck, 24 years ago now, the idea that the story of 9/11, within a quarter century of 9/11 having happened, would be mobilized as a story about the unfair treatment of people who were of the Muslim faith is, I think, leave aside everything else. I mean, never forget, obviously, is the message that many people who lived through 9/11 continue to reiterate, including our friends at Tunnel of Towers, who I helped raise money for just a couple of weeks ago. But for the story to shift 24 years later as an argument for why New York should elect a Muslim mayor, to, in the aftermath of 9/11, there was actually really unfair treatment of people of this religious faith, regardless of how the election goes, Buck, is incredibly alarming, I think, for the future of New York City.
Look, Mamdani had to create some version of victim status for himself to be truly worthy of the left-wing adulation that he has, right? And by the way, the method by which white Democrats do this is going even more, hardcore on how bad white men are, right? This is that's how you get around it. You go, oh my gosh, as a white man, I'm part of the problem. For Mamdani, obviously not white, what he says is, oh, I've suffered the Islamophobia. I've suffered all this Islamophobia, which, as I've said, is a nonsense term, an absurd term meant to shut down debate and discussion and legitimate criticism of factions within a faith that have engaged in a lot of violence, including the biggest terrorist attack in the history of the modern world. So, yes, that is something that we should be able to look at. But, Clay, it's not also unusual for the left. I want to focus this back into Mamdani here. I know you do too in a second, but just something that, as you were talking about this, the horrible thing happens committed by a group that is ideologically motivated to do it, and then we're told the real problem is that group may be targeted. That's not just with Islam, radical Islam, and terrorism, for example. Look what happened after the Covington shooting in Tennessee. When you have these trans mass murdering school shooters, what do you see all over Blue Sky and a little bit on Twitter and on MSNBC? Oh, just think of all the blowback on the trans community now. No blowback on the trans community. We just don't want people shooting people. And if there are people that are being told they should shoot people because there's terrible stuff that's being done, that's a genocide, that's a lie, we should address that.
Look, if 20 people in Clay and Buck gear showed up and committed a mass murder anywhere in the United States, I am on the Clay and Buck show, and I would be like, maybe I shouldn't wear Clay and Buck gear the next day. Like, can we just go to the logic of this? Like, If
I
you're,
don't even like this though. The Clay and Buck audience.
I get it,
But I'm saying
I'm
random acts they're going to commit are hugs and hanging out and beer and America and flags.
But just kind of run through the logic here. You are Buck, I am Clay. If, for people who don't know, if like we are Clay and Buck, if a bunch of you in our gear committed a mass murder, I don't think I would want to wear a Clay and Buck shirt in the city where the mass murder happened the next day. And then my name is Clay. So like the whole idea of if people that you are connected to in any form or fashion, take away the religious aspect, in any form or fashion, like this is like even the argument, oh, well, they were worried that people might, well, hey, if people connected to you in any way have committed the worst terror atrocity in modern American life, I don't think it's crazy for you to think to yourself, hey, people might associate me with them. And by the way, that's rational.
But left-wing victimology dictates that when somebody from the left or from a group that you generally like or whatever does a terrible thing, you have to go in the other direction. You're the real victim. You're the one that actually needs to be, thought of and people need to be offering prayers for. It's the Norm Macdonald joke made real, which is, imagine if there was a nuclear attack on New York City. Just think of all the Islamophobia, right? That is Zohran Mamdani. That is left-wing, boo-hoo, poor me nonsense. And it's not just Zohran. It is also tied in to the basic emotional impulses of socialism, which is always rooted in an authoritarianism of there's inequality in society. Give me a lot of power as the socialist, as the people running, the socialist entity, and I will equalize everything. It's a very bad idea. It never works. It always destroys. Check out Venezuela, Cuba, the Soviet Union. Just go down the list.
I just, yes, all of that is true. I think it's really funny if you take it outside of religion and just think about whatever group it is and wearing their gear the next day. You'd be like, yeah, I don't really think I want to do that. And that is the cultural touchstone litmus test that Mamdani now takes 24 years later as the lesson of 9/11. I feel bad for people who had to live in New York City in the aftermath of 9/11. I feel way worse for all the people who died.
You're thinking about this 3 layers of analysis deeper than Mamdani. Mamdani's just like, I'm a victim too.
Oh, totally.
Look what happened to my family, right? I mean, he doesn't even, you're going to the actual reality, the truth of this. It doesn't matter to him. He just wanted to complain.
The scary thing is, Buck, kids today in college, all of them were born post 9/11. And we may think it's ridiculous when Mamdani says, hey, my aunt was a victim of 9/11. She didn't feel comfortable on public transit in the city. Even if he's completely lying, some of these moron kids out there who haven't experienced 9/11 and don't have any historical knowledge, which unfortunately is huge majorities of the American population, school children wise, they look around and they think to themselves, well, that was really bad because of this toxic empathy. He knows what he's doing. He's trying to change the history and the narrative and make correct his side, the victims.
We'll come back into this for a lot of discussion, so stay with us. Look, there's AI, artificial intelligence. It's changing the world right now. I mean, something as simple as using your Maps app on your smartphone or calling a business and being guided through the prompts. AI is changing our lives. The AI assistant that I have on my phone, I'm using it all the time. This White House, this administration, well, they've got a crypto and AI czar, and they know that this is the future. It's going to change so much, and there's enormous opportunities. I don't want you to miss out on this. So I've launched a weekly e-newsletter called Money and Power. It's separate from this program, by the way. This is a totally independent thing that I'm working on. It's a one-of-a-kind opportunity designed to help ordinary people capitalize on the huge wealth explosion that's being created by AI and what I'm calling Manhattan Project 2, and it ties right into Trump administration policy. Look, I want you to see all this analysis and where we think there's some great, and by the way, I've teamed up with phenomenal stock analysts. That's not what I do. I do the stories, the big think, the politics, the national trends. Then we've got people who are pulling together a portfolio. They publish that portfolio. You can see for yourself how it's doing. Go check this out. Go to insider2025.com. Insider2025.com, paid for by Paradigm Press.